Welcome, everybody, to the Week 5 Thursday night hangout live. Cecil Lammey on assignment. Sigmund Bloom here covering for you. Matt Waldman sporting the neon green, and we're going to watch the neon green tonight before we get into all things medical with Dr. Jene. Wildman, give us a game update at halftime.
Yeah, it's kind of been a back and forth game, but really more because of the fact that the Rams have kind of salvaged the second quarter. The first quarter was pretty much all Seahawks with some decent running by Todd Gurley up the middle early, but then basically the offensive line not being able to hold up for Jared Goff and being able to where their double teams couldn't even hold back defensive tackles to be able to put pressure on Goff while he's having routes run downfield that weren't even at their point of the breaking point yet for him to be able to even deliver a ball. But, on the offensive side, Russell Wilson doing his magic, working one way to the other to avoid Darnold and Dante Fowler and finding Tyler Lockett for a near impossible dream of a catch at the back of the end zone for a touchdown. And then he found DK Metcalf running a deep post basically against the zone coverage with outside shade where he could just turn back and wait on the ball. Chris Carson is doing his thing, holding on to the ball and just moving the chains and moving piles. And even Will Dissly's getting involved. There was a beautiful seam pass for Will Dissly off play action that was just a thing of beauty that I just put up on Twitter. But Jared Goff, they found a way to put some duct tape on the interior part of that offensive line and drive down the field a little bit with passes to Cooper Kupp and some. They've been trying to get Gerald Everett involved. Hasn't quite worked out. He's dropped some balls. Robert Woods has dropped a ball, but Kupp's kind of saved their bacon, and he made a nice play in the end zone. To make this game, a competitive contest as we enter the half.
Yeah, Rams offense has been, I think, a little better than expected from one perspective, but also it's the Seattle defense, no matter what they did to Arizona, and Russell Wilson doing Russell Wilson things. That's always a joy to watch. Always a joy to talk to Dr. Jene Bramel. Jene, there's what we think should happen, what will be good for our fantasy teams, what we hope happens, what's going to happen. A lot of those things aren't lined up when we talk about T.Y. Hilton. I feel like he just shouldn't play, not with a bye next week. This isn't a divisional opponent, but he's going to try to play. Is he going to play, and is it a good thing if he does?
Well, I don't know if it's a good. It's not a good thing if he does, and then he has an aggravation. I think that's the concern is that he's already aggravated the quad injury once. They gave him at least a chance toward the end of last week to kind of prepare him a little bit, and he continues to do a little bit more. I think we keep hearing about this by Frank Reich has talked about it. Hilton has even made mention of it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to risk him, but they're going to allow him to practice on Friday, it seems like, and then see how he responds to the Thursday and Friday back-to-back practices. And if he does better than expected, they may allow him to go. But I think I'm still leaning towards him being on the doubtful side of questionable. And if he does play, we're going to all be crossing our fingers that he doesn't have any aggravations.
So Saquon Barkley, the urban legend is Saquon Barkley is cutting and running sprints and leaping over tall buildings and making cuts that would is Saquon Barkley human? That's what James Blackmore just asked. And I think a lot of this is just was he really injured? Did he really have the injury he had, or is it really more that he's cutting? "Quote unquote," air quote cutting, but he's not football cutting.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So, both Shermer and Barkley said, it wasn't our doctors that said 6 to 8 weeks. And, that little note we got from Adam Schefter that said, generally accurate, where there's at least a concern that maybe this stretches through the bye week and on into week 11 or 12, where it's more of an 8-week injury than a 4 to 6 week injury. And you can get a sense in video of how severe these injuries are, but you have to wait really for 24 to 48 hours and see how much stiffness and swelling and then they had an MRI as well. So there was no incentive for them to come out and directly refute the reports that we were seeing where it was a 6-week injury or so. I still think, maybe we don't consider him human if he's able to come back this Thursday. And I agree with you. I don't think we saw anything where he was cutting at speed. Going full speed forward is not a huge issue for somebody with a high ankle sprain. It becomes a little bit of an issue when you try to slow down. And it definitely becomes a little bit of an issue, not a little bit of an issue, a bigger issue when we're trying to move laterally and show some explosiveness and be stable unusual enough in your lower leg there that, a funny step or an unusual cut or, running through the trash and being tackled doesn't cause an aggravation.
Do you have any Monty Python cartoons to illustrate?
Exactly.
Very nice. That's great.
I'll give you the sound effect anyway. I don't have a whole lot of Terry Gilliam in my repertoire, unfortunately. But so I don't think we're going to see him this week, Barkley. And but it does look like they may give him a chance to play next Thursday. But I think he still needs to be doing more. I still think it probably makes a little bit of sense to give him extra time rather than push him back at the early end of the timetable. But those discussions about, last week we talked about, well, maybe we don't see him back until week 9 against Dallas. And I think that's becoming less and less of an issue.
Aren't the Giants Patriots games, haven't they all, not just the Super Bowls, right? Haven't the regular season games even been epic? Maybe that means that Saquon Barkley is going to come out and Willis Reed to surprise it. But Gary Martin's in the chat room. So how about an update on Gallup? Let's take a poll on Gallup. Ooh, dad humor.
Yeah.
I'm hoping he's back and healthy ASAP. Dallas Green Bay might be the most fascinating game on the slate this week, Gene. Michael Gallup, Devin Smith's not cutting it. Michael Gallup get on the field this week?
Yeah, it looks like they're preparing him to play. Sorry, I cut that discussion on Barkley off a little bit because Cooper Kupp didn't like the way he landed on that knee and never like it when he pulls up his football pants on the sideline to show that big old ACL scar there, but was back on the field on that last game. Probably just something that scared him just a little bit. So hopefully nothing to be concerned about there with him. Gallup, he was disappointed last week that he wasn't able to meet the early part of the rehab timetable. They've been participating him in practice this week with the expectation that he's going to be able to play. So hopefully that's what we see, barring some, unexpected. He didn't respond well to Thursday's practice. I think we'll see him do more on Friday and be ready to go.
Tyreek Hill, what do we have?
Same thing as Barkley. I think, with some exceptions, there are outliers where players beat the original rehab timetable. And as we've kind of talked about from the beginning, the most reasonable comp for this is Danny Amendola a few years ago, who had the very same injury, very same position, who took 5 weeks to come back. And that included a bye week in the middle, but it was around 5 weeks. And so this week would be closer to 4 weeks for him. The stability of the joint is probably still in question, but they've allowed him to do everything but take contact. I just don't see them clearing him for contact on Friday and then allowing him to play. I suppose that's possible, but I think next week is looking more and more likely. The kind of over-under I thought was most likely when this first happened was week 7 against Denver, and it's looking more and more likely he's going to be able to get back. Hill is for week 6.
Gene, let's go back to that stay with the Indy KC game since we're talking about Tyreek Hill. Marlon Mack, and what's odd here is he didn't play in the second half, but they said he wasn't medically barred from doing that, and it was the game script, but now he's missing practices. This also is not his first lower leg malady of the season. And we have these Sunday night games can always be tricky because then you have to have someone from the Sunday night game or the Monday night game to wait on Marlon Mack. What's in the math in your head about Marlon Mack playing this week?
I feel okay about it. I don't know why Frank Reich would be so specific about saying, well, it was hurry up offense and he's not part of that personnel package and we held him out. They did allow him to come back after halftime and take a couple of carries. And there were a couple of situations. I saw one play that I thought was questionable, and then I saw some beat writers tweet another play that looked questionable. So there were a couple of times where he had an injury tweak. There wasn't anything obvious on video, kind of similar to the James Conner situation, that would say that this is definitely an injury that's going to be a concern in week 3 with this calf injury. Mack didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday, had us all scared, came back and did some more on Friday, had some optimistic news, and then had a ton of snaps in week 3's game. So I'm hoping that's the way it's going to go. Friday practice participation is going to be helpful. I don't think we're going to get kind of a dreaded game time decision and not know exactly where we are until late on Sunday afternoon, and hopefully we'll get some more reporting as the weekend goes on. So I'm expecting him to play right now, but I think we have to see how Friday goes before we say for certain.
Well, quick game update. Todd Gurley scored off the right guard where they walled off Jadeveon Clowney from looks like at least 10 yards out on that. So that was now the Rams have the lead. Davante Adams' toe. So, you said that generally in your fine reports that the generally conservative Green Bay staff is unlikely to risk aggravation, but I mean, how do we know? How does someone know whether the toe is, a multi-week injury or just like a 1-week deal?
I think that the grade of the injury on the MRI gives folks a little bit understanding, but again, a lot of it is up to how the injury progresses, how much swelling is there. Some mid-grade injuries are a little bit more significant than others based on how much bleeding's there, how much other issues might be around the joint or in other areas that they're already fighting through. This one was a little bit concerning from the beginning because it was said to be a multiple week injury, and then thankfully there were no fractures on the X-ray, and the MRI didn't show any. Not that his toe injury is not significant, but wasn't any other structural issues to the bottom of the foot where the toe connects to the foot there. So I think that's good. But these are still painful injuries. You're talking about players that are playing with smaller and smaller shoes, and you can try to jam an orthotic in there and tape and support the joint up a little bit, but it's an injury that can be easily aggravated, and you don't want something that's maybe a relatively lower mid-grade sprain to become something that's a little bit more concerning. The conservative Green Bay staff wasn't able to keep Za'Darius Smith off the field. It sounds like there were some reports about that this week. So, maybe players have a little bit more ability to get themselves on the field. But Adams did not look comfortable on the sidelines at all after the injury, and there's not been any indication that he's done much more than just very light running on the side in practice. He's not a player that you'd expect to ramp up a lot of practice participation in Friday and be ready to go. But, the hope here will be that we'll be able to see him back soon, if not next week, then shortly after.
Doc in the chat room, FQD 1911 wants to know, Damien Williams, full go, good doctor?
I guess. I'm kind of surprised. Kansas City usually gives us some pretty good information on what the injuries are. You never heard anything about Damien Williams other than a bruise. Not too much information about how severe it was. We just knew that he didn't practice for 2 weeks. So I was surprised when there was a full practice on Wednesday and he felt good enough to return to a full practice on Thursday, which is generally the biggest practice of the week. So assuming there's nothing unusual and that his knee responded to that increased participation, you would think that, they wanted to see what he looked like on Wednesday and Thursday so that they could game plan with that in mind. So I think he's going to be a part of the backfield. It looks like he's preparing to play. We'll see if Andy Reid and company talk a little bit about it on Friday after the final practice of the week. But yeah, I would expect him, assuming they're comfortable with his conditioning, to get pretty close to whatever workload they'd like to give him. And I'll let you guys talk about what that may be. We got, 3 very capable folks there. And, with Tyreek Hill getting back soon, there's going to be a ton of mouths to feed on that offense.
So, Gene, Sam Darnold's spleen, is it the size of like a partial red bell pepper, or is it more like an eggplant?
Let's go to the farmer's market.
I don't think I've ever been asked to liken the size of an organ to a vegetable before. I don't think that's
grapefruit, orange.
Yeah, that's probably not where we want to go.
Papa beans.
Even if this was the second hour of the old time Audible, we're going to stay away from comparing organs to vegetables.
Organs? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No sweetbreads then. We can't have sweetbreads.
So, this is interesting to me because we really weren't sure what had happened Monday. Like, why is he cleared for individual drills but not contact? Was this all part of the plan, or was he not ready for contact? And then we were pretty much told on Wednesday that he hadn't been cleared for contact because there was still some spleen enlargement on the test on Monday. And the Jets are motivated enough where they're going to bring him back for an additional ultrasounds and some blood tests to make sure that the spleen is healthy and going back to a normal size. The other thing that was evident from the reporting this week is that they really haven't cleared him to do much conditioning. And although he didn't feel terribly, as a lot of folks do with mono illnesses where you just feel super fatigued, they really didn't clear him to do much, even any light exercise. So his conditioning really isn't there. So it sounds like the Jets are motivated to bring him back. And if his, I don't know how much interval improvement there's likely to be in 3 days anyway, when there hasn't been in 21 days. If his scans are reasonable and there's no signs of blood cells that are being damaged because the spleen's a little bit bigger or sequestering important blood cells that he may need, that's what the blood tests are going to be for. Maybe they do clear him to go. But, if his conditioning isn't there and he's already saying, my goal is to not die on the field.
Exactly.
Then, yeah. Which is
We've been doing this a long time, and that's
Never
the first time I've ever heard that. Yeah,
I don't want to die this week. Yeah, so
outlook questionable.
Yeah, if that's on your mind and the conditioning isn't there, then I think we have to be concerned about things. So, I don't know. I think they're probably still going to go through with the testing on Friday, and maybe we get some sort of reassuring report. And Sam Darnold probably doesn't have to be in peak cardiovascular conditioning to play inside the pocket, but I don't know that there's much risk there. It was said to be 3 to 6 weeks, and although every player would like to meet the early side of those rehab goals, right now I feel like we're going to be surprised if he plays.
I mean, we're at the point now, instead of tank for Tua, we'd have sacrifice for
for Moloch.
Exactly.
All right. Now we're in full in the second hour. Biff wanted to know, how's Hunter Henry? When could we expect him back? And also there was somebody else in the chat room. I want to get James Blackmer wants to hear Hunter Henry. Give the people what they want, Gene.
It's looking good for Hunter Henry as well. Sprinting in a straight line, albeit with a brace. He still has to cut. He still has to prove that he can get back into condition. This was another injury that, we're not quite yet to even the underside of the recovery estimate. It was a 4 to 6 week injury according to what was reported. And we're coming up against that right now. So I don't see much chance he plays this week. But the fact that they're allowing him to do a little bit more on the side, even though he's really not participating in any official practice capacity, there's a chance that if his conditioning is good and he responds well to this week's challenges that he's facing, that maybe we will see him next week. But it certainly doesn't look like it's going to be on the 6-week end of the timetable. I think next week is possible.
Gene, any word on Kenny Stills? Because we need some of those Kiki QT socks, and
yes,
and Angry Moose One wants some Hurley Gurley singing.
Yeah. We'll get there.
I think there's a chance he plays. They're calling him day to day. They want to see how he responds during the week. He's got a couple of different things going on, the hamstring being probably the most concerning of the group. I think with the depth that they have on offense, they don't need to rush him back. So if there's any question, I think he's more likely to be inactive than not. But if practice goes well on Friday, maybe we'll see him for a limited number of snaps.
Let's see, Gene, James Conner, and Matt. In the second half hour, we're going to talk a little more about Jalen Samuels. Obviously, the door could open for Jalen Samuels even further. Conner hasn't practiced yet. I know you've reminded us before that the Steelers just don't let players. And Juju also has not practiced yet, but we've already heard they expect him to play. They don't let players play if they don't practice. What do you think about the Steelers dynamic duo?
The Steelers are doing things a little bit differently. They have allowed players who don't do much on the second practice of the week, whether it's generally the Thursday practice or Friday going into the Monday Night Football game last week, to have a chance to do a little bit more on Friday and then play. Whereas in the past, if you saw a Steeler not practicing on Thursday, they were not playing. But all three of these guys, from Conner to Smith-Schuster to even Vance McDonald, are still being given a chance to play publicly by the coaching staff. And we've seen Conner go through this particular practice participation and Smith-Schuster as well already this year, and then return to play. So I'm hopeful that that's what we're likely to see. I think Smith-Schuster is probably the most likely to play. I'm giving Conner a pretty good chance to play right now. He's been cleared to talk to radio hosts. He's been talking to the beat writers in the room. He just hasn't been practicing. And I didn't see anything, kind of went frame by frame, even tried to look at it on the All-22 yesterday before writing the Wednesday feature. And I didn't notice anything that looked clearly like a low-grade high ankle that might be a little bit hard for him to get back from or not. He limped off the field and then came back. So I have a pretty good feeling about him being able to go this week. Vance McDonald is probably the one of the three that's got the smallest chance to play. But practice participation is going to be important. If for some reason we don't see Smith-Schuster or Conner on the field tomorrow at all, then we got to be really concerned whether or not they're going to go this weekend.
So, Gene, I'm asking for a friend here. How many weeks do we have Dawson Knox available in starting lineups?
Don't know, man. I think you're going to get Josh Oliver back pretty soon, too. He's been limited in practice, so we're going to see some of these middle-round rookie tight ends get a little bit more practice time.
But seriously, is Tyler Kroft, is he anywhere near back to being available?
So he's out of his walking boot last week, doing a little bit more in practice, and I think he's going to be back sooner than later. But that had the feeling of a multiple-week injury. Nobody seemed very comfortable discussing it, and seemed like it was going to be a long-term deal. But the fact that he's not immobilized and allowed to do a little bit more is a pretty reassuring situation right now. So not this week for Kroft, I don't think, but I think we may be getting there with him next week, if not the week after.
Do one more round with the doctor, Gene, and I want to ask you about Stephon Diggs cold, but I'm not going to do that. That would certainly be fun. I'm not going to do that because fantasy football 1-on-1 wants to know about Tevin Coleman. We had Sam and Darnold coming off the bye, maybe not playing this week. Tevin Coleman coming off the bye and playing on Monday night to complicate things.
Mm-hmm. So I had forgotten that Buffalo had a bye next week. So we're probably going to see Tyler Kroft in week 7. That was likely the best case scenario all along. And Devin Singletary may belong in that category as well. He's doing a little bit more in practice. Apparently he was a little bit more closer to playing than we thought he was on Sunday. So we'll sort of see how that goes. Tevin Coleman, the plan was for him to start doing more through the bye week and be able to practice. The beat writers that saw the portion of practice open to them today thought he was doing everything. He ended up being listed as limited on Thursday leading into the Monday Night Football game. But everybody thought that he was much closer to a full practice than a limited practice. So he's going to play. How they split up the snaps remains to be seen, but he looks like he's going to be good to go.
All right, Gene. So how's Alex Mack's elbow? Because I want to see how quick I can do my recaps for the
So offensive line folks are a totally different breed. That looked like a pretty significant injury when you saw him sort of trot off the field. Did he have a little bit of a change in his joint? Was a little bit more than that. And then for him to come back after missing just a handful of snaps was pretty impressive. And then he's not practiced much. So there's a lot going on with the Atlanta offensive line right now. Caleb McGarry continues to just battle through this knee injury that he's had for weeks now. Mack's replacement, Wes Schweitzer, is dealing with something that has kept him out of practice a little bit. He looks a little healthier than Mack at that point, but players like Mack, you do not put anything past them. I mean, he may not practice all week and still be able to go. Lyle Collins is in that category as well. He may not practice, but is expected to play. There's not been a lot out of Atlanta. It seems like maybe, come Monday, after the night game, that he was just not comfortable at all, and then we had a little bit more irritation than what they expected. But you didn't hear about any imaging studies of concern. There just hasn't been a lot of talk from the local writers that sounds optimistic, where no, he's just not going to practice, but he's good to go. So tomorrow's going to be important. If he doesn't practice on Friday, I think we need to be a little bit more concerned about it.
And I was going to say you can't get anything past Gene, but I'm going to not leave without trying to get this last one, because the fellow KGB is the man. And this one's kind of important. Tyron Smith and Lyle Collins, key players to that Dallas offense while we're on the subject of offensive line.
Yeah, it sounds like Collins going to go. Collins hasn't practiced either Wednesday or Thursday, but the expectation is that he's going to play. And I think they are being extremely careful with his back situation because they know that Tyron Smith is not going to play with his high ankle sprain. Jerry Jones is saying that Smith's injury is not as severe as it might have looked. That had the look of a really nasty lower leg injury when it happened. But again, the day after is when it kind of tells the tale. And if there's not a lot of stiffness and swelling, and the MRI looks pretty good, it doesn't make any difference how it looked video-wise. That's why, we get pretty close to knowing what the injury may be, but the severity is tough for us to judge just based on video, unless it's really obvious that there's been some sort of fracture, dislocation, or something. Smith is not going to play this week. They're hopeful that they'll have him back the following week. So whether or not Collins practices tomorrow, depending on how cautious they decide to be with him, I think he's going to go. Same thing goes for Zach Martin. He's been limited, off and on with the back issues that he's dealing with, but he should be good to go this weekend too.
And the bonus question. Thank you, Doc. You really can't get anything past Dr. Gene. Unflappable, doing the impossible, really, and keeping us all on target. Because, Gene, I know from doing the projections, and I use your work, I refer to it, that we have a lot of moving targets. We have a lot of things that every day change, and then new things get added. And, man, you always are for us, and you're so pleasant, too, your bedside manner. So thank you. Thank you always.
You are welcome. Enjoy the rest of the evening. See ya.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, and again, look it up, folks. Then thrown like a star in my vast sleep, I opened my eyes to take a peek to find that I was by the sea, gazing with tranquility by the sea in Seattle. It was then when the hurly-gurly man came singing songs of love. Yeah, there it is. And that's really supposed to be for the recap show. but he did score. And Matt, I mean, you've been chronicling this. We had all of our speculative debates, and I can't remember who it was on Twitter that said, okay, but when are we going to see Gurley cut? He's certainly what you like tonight, and I would say he looks the best tonight as he has looked all season. Because what you're seeing are the tacklers being propelled backwards at the end of the run. What you're seeing is him breaking 1 or 2 tackles on these runs. He's still very straight lines, but can be very effective. And look, in reality, when you look at the carnage at running back, he's actually kind of on schedule, maybe not to return first or mid-second round value, but third round value, which is more than you can say for some other running backs like James Conner that we'll talk about or not. What do you see as I sing in honor of Todd Gurley? Has anything you've seen tonight changed your pretty positive outlook on Gurley to date?
No, it's remained the same, other than the fact that it's a good thing now that they're running him up the middle and off guard as opposed to trying to run off tackle, which is another reason why you're seeing more of a straight line-ish Todd Gurley. He's only having to make one cut and get downhill, and he's not having to work east-west and north-south as much, which is a greater challenge, especially when your offensive line has played poorly for much of the season. So I think they're countering what teams have been doing to foil Sean McVay's system, which is all predicated on this outside zone and jet sweep type of thing. And now they're trying to run a little bit more to the inside, which is good for Gurley and his powerful type of play. So all in all, I mean, I think you should feel good that he's going to be a running back too this year.
Yeah, and right now we're seeing Chris Carson running and Tyler Lockett doing his thing. Seattle trying to mount a drive. Classic back and forth game. Matt, it feels like when Seattle and the Rams have gotten together in the McVay era, well, the score's been like 33-31, classic back and forth, who has the ball last kind of games, or which defense can come up with that individual play by somebody. So this is shaping up to be another good Thursday night game. 2 good Thursday night games in a row.
Yeah.
So we enjoy that. On the subject of the Rams, while we've got the Rams on our mind, it has seemed like, and you can correct me because oftentimes, folks, you haven't picked up on this yet, I pontificate, I emote, and Matt will say something rooted in reality and say, well, there might be something to whatever you're feeling right now, but this is what's actually happening. It does not feel to me like Sean McVay is counterpunched. And you mentioned this implied when you talked about how they're running Gurley, that he wasn't anticipating that what I did last year isn't going to work this year, and I need to be a step ahead. Now, you talk about often that 4-week cycle that the season moves in, so it would make sense. Week 5 could be a correction week, although it's a short week. But have you been disappointed by the Rams offense? That week last week is going to add a bunch of numbers at the end of the year. But otherwise, they faced a beat-up Cleveland secondary and didn't do a lot. And of course, against New Orleans, they knocked out Drew Brees, so that kind of changed that game. But we could also say, hey, the Rams, they faced the Panthers, the Saints. Those are some pretty tough defenses, so maybe we should give them a pass. What's your grade on Sean McVay 1 quarter in to year 3?
Yeah, and just a quick game update. David Moore caught a wide receiver screen and scored, so Seattle's now back ahead in this tilt. But I think it comes down to 2 things. Sean McVay has kind of felt like the kid fumbling in his pockets to come up with the permission slip, and there's all sorts of things in his pockets other than the permission slip at this point, but you see, they're trying to get the tight end involved a little bit more. Now they're trying to run up the middle a little bit more, but I think it comes down to 2 things. We know that there's a lot made about Jared Goff, what he is and what he isn't. I think he's a good NFL starting quarterback who isn't going to do it all by himself. He's kind of like, I would say he's kind of like a middle-class Matt Ryan, in the sense of that you give Matt Ryan enough weapons and he can be a contending quarterback and be an be a Pro Bowl quarterback. You don't give him enough weapons and, Ryan's a little smarter about this. He'll throw the ball in the dirt and he'll give up on plays, and he'll even Jeff Georgia play here and there if he needs to make a point to his offensive line. Whereas Jared Goff's at this point a little too tough for his own good, sometimes taking hits. But with that said, the biggest issue to me is this offensive line has taken a major step down. They've lost some good players, so they're not as effective as they once were. And then in addition to that, in addition to that, the defense has been pretty awful too in the back end of the secondary. I mean, I wonder if Aqib Talib's playing hurt with some of the things that he's doing, because I watched him and I feel like that, it's almost like after that Carolina game against Steve Smith way back on Monday night, like somehow he channeled back into that guy after Steve Smith told him to ice up, and his manhood was probably shrunken a little bit, because he's not playing the same way that he's been capable of, and he's given up a lot of big plays. And that Peters, as talented as he is as a ball hawk, he's as undisciplined as can be. He's like the Jameis Winston of cornerbacks in terms of he'll make 3 horrible plays and then make a game-changing play, a little bit later in this. So the defense is inconsistent. The offensive line hasn't been good. And then you've had this slow start. And I think that the team is, fantasy-wise, you still got to hold on to all these guys in the passing game. You got to hold on to all your fantasy players for the Rams, but it is a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Folks, Fantasy Draft is launching rake-free daily fantasy. All right. You're tired. I know I'm tired of paying high fees to play daily fantasy. Over time, these fees, the rake, can cost daily fantasy players over 30% of their bankroll. More rake means more money lining the pockets of big DFS sites and less money for players like you and me. Fantasy Draft is bringing you rake-free daily fantasy. Playing your favorite contest rake-free on Fantasy Draft will save you hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars in rake every month. Every dollar paid in entry fees will be paid to the contest winners. Go to Fantasy Draft. Use the promo code FootballGuys, and you'll get a free 7-day trial. So for 7 days, free, rake-free daily fantasy on your first $1,000 in entries. All right. Fantasy Draft. Check it out. Rake free. Getting the middleman out, just like they are in California and many other states eventually. Wild man when it comes to endorsement money and things like that. Okay. Just we're overdue for a couch session just to get some things going, But there's a lot of stuff to talk about. And this is another thing where, again, Steelers, I can see things in a skewed light. And we heard Dr. Gene talk about James Conner, whether he's going to play or not, and things like that. To my eyes, Matt, I don't see James Conner as definitively better than Jalen Samuels or having more to offer the offense than Jalen Samuels. I've been calling for the 2-back set. I've been calling for more Jalen Samuels. And lots of people have. I didn't invent that. And voila, we saw what happened. And really, it makes sense. I was thinking of it in terms of Mason Rudolph in that Phillip Rivers axis and how Phillip Rivers using those receivers, the running backs, Eckler and Gordon, and how that made his life a lot easier. I feel like what we saw in week 4, and there's always rational coaching, what we saw in week 4 should be a model for what we see going forward. I think this should be a 2-back backfield going forward. Am I being too aspirational here? Am I inflating Samuels? Am I underselling Conner? We've both been pretty positive on Conner. And do you want to even take a stab at what you think the Steelers will do with their backfield now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And Jared Everett just showed what he did at Southern Alabama, which is run after the catch, took a catch over the middle on kind of a little bit of a throwback, and then just literally made people miss and busted through tackles and pushed through, and then made a beautiful Kevin Dyson-like extension that actually succeeded across the line of scrimmage for the touchdown here off this beautiful play action. And it was a scramble where Everett kind of cut off his route and worked from about the 30 in and just kind of Supermaned his way across the line. But that's first and goal. They decided that it didn't quite get there. So
need to clear my throat.
Yep, very much that. But there, Todd Gurley just worked across the feelings, across the goal line. So we may get another rendition of that. So Jalen Samuels, I don't think you're seeing anything different than I am. I mean, this is a guy with good footwork. He has good burst. He has a good feel for, setting up blocks. Obviously, we know he can catch, being the tight end H-back that he was, at NC State. That's certainly a nice capability to his game. His burst is pretty darn good. I mean, it's not, so I like that about his game. He's a player that gives you a lot of what James Conner does. I think Conner's a little bit more powerful. I think Conner runs a little more balanced. I think he's a little bit more refined as a runner than Samuel, but not so much so that you're missing out. And really, with the way these receivers are playing in Pittsburgh, as inconsistent as they've been, you kind of have to. And you have Mason Rudolph in the way that, him being basically a first-year, starter. I can understand why they want to put two backs in the backfield and play to their strengths, which is their offensive line and their running game, and try and do some creative things around that. So I can see them doing a little bit more from that perspective, because they're trying to hide Rudolph in certain aspects, and they have receivers who either, like James Washington, can't run the right depth of route consistently, or Deontay Johnson, who can't seem to catch the ball consistently. And then you have, we haven't even gotten to Moncrief, and so at this point, running the ball makes the most sense.
Histories of ages past, unenlightened, shadowed, cast down through all eternity, the crying of humanity. It was then when the hurly-gurly man came singing songs of love. This is like, maybe he's not running roughshod everybody, but the offense is moving the ball. He's finished drives. And what does it mean about Arizona that Seattle made them look so feeble when the Rams are slicing through them, and the tennis match goes back to Seattle, and Russell Wilson is Jared Goff also gets a 2-point conversion there. But this is a week, and Gurley scoring last week twice also. Looks like things are going to work out if you took Todd Gurley overall, although you're not necessarily going to get first round value, but maybe if this offense continues to do this. How about Deontay Johnson? By the way, wild man, if there's one thing we can take away here, if defenses are taking away Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson's left one-on-one, it looks like the Steelers have hit yet another one at wide receiver.
Yeah, certainly there's some talent there with him. It's just a matter of consistency. And he's probably
this week against the Ravens, though. The Ravens pass defense.
Yeah, I'd say this. On paper, the Ravens' pass defense is certainly going to be exploitable. It's just whether or not Mason Rudolph can do it. That's the big question.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's true.
But I do think that if you're going to take your chances, why wouldn't you take your chances on Deontay Johnson in that respect? It's just that they haven't thrown the ball downfield a ton, have they? It seems like they've been trying to, which is kind of funny because that's where Rudolph's strengths has often been, but maybe for his receivers it hasn't been, and they've been throwing a lot in the short and really shallow intermediate range of the field, it seems like.
Yeah, it's been a neutered pass offense, really, especially when and I'm not even talking about Ben Roethlisberger extending plays and things like that. I'm just talking about keeping the whole field in play, and it's definitely been disappointing. But I think this week against the Ravens, they're not going to be able to get away with that.
Are they like a neutered kitten? Like, have you ever seen like...
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. No. Look. Let's. Where else go? There's so many different directions we could go with this. I wanted to give you a chance. Maybe you might actually break out into song about Nick Chubb. I guess that's a good place to go because Nick Chubb was kind of a Leonard Fournette type fantasy factor in the first 3 weeks, getting the volume. Certainly not a disappointment for fantasy, but not coming through. And then, week 4, he goes Hercules on the Ravens. We get to watch him on Monday night. I think you had a really good take on describing for people exactly what Cleveland did, and it might not have looked dramatic. And who probably loved it was Eric Stoner. We're both texting with Eric Stoner a lot, and he's like old man, shakes his fist at cloud about some of these different things going on in the league and reliance on the running game and putting Baker Mayfield under center. So what did you think of that transformation that put your Browns, and I'm calling them your Browns, Matt, right back in the thick of it? And do you expect that rational coaching to continue?
I hope it does. I really do, because the big deal has been that when you run from shotgun, there's 2 problems with doing that. One is that you put your offensive linemen automatically in a pass set. So they basically lose their leverage to attack defensive linemen downhill. So they're in automatically a more difficult situation to run the football. Second of all, you're usually asking your running back to either run straight downhill or to one side of the field. So you've cut out 1/3 of his options compared to what you do at center. So if there's penetration, he only has 2 possible places to go, probably even really 1 at that point when you cut it off. So you only have 1 possible option. Whereas if you're running downhill and there's penetration, you usually have 2 possible options to avoid. So it's one of those situations that, in addition to that, you have one of the most powerful, quickest, fastest, well-balanced backs in football. And you don't want to, and you have an offensive line where you basically lost Kevin Zeitler. You lost Joe Thomas a couple years ago and never really recovered. And you're not going to try and give your offensive line an opportunity to run downhill and attack. And you're going to literally put one arm behind their back. It just didn't make any sense. So now that they're running him downhill, he's got more choices. You're seeing him in situations where he's generating bigger plays. He's getting a more consistent push downhill. And what it helps is that it helps Baker Mayfield in the play action game, because now it's even more believable that they're going to run the football when he's under center, when they have Baker Mayfield under center, or it's a more dangerous threat. Now you have like a cocked and loaded gun where the gun's drawn. Whereas in shotgun, they cocked the gun, but they put it in the holster, and Barney Fife was like operating it, so he was likely going to shoot his toe off. But you look at this situation, and now you also are able to vary your formations a little bit more. Not only are you just running, single back sets with 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, they also showed 20 personnel. So they had a fullback that was really like an H-back and 3 wide receivers. So they spread the field, and now Chubb's, running downhill with blocking sets that are advantageous against 6 and 7 defenders in the box instead of 8 or 9. And that's just unfair for opposing defenses. So when you put all that together, this is helping Baker Mayfield. They figure out a way to be able to vary formations, do some misdirection, which is something they weren't doing a lot of either. And when you have Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham, who are so good after the catch, and you're not using them as a possible threat, it's just not, your offense is just kind of, I said last week that they were kind of the throw it up and see if it sticks offense. Now it looks like they figured out a whole game plan, and it's working. And I expect Nick Chubb to be a top 5 back for the rest of the season, as long as this offense continues to look the way it does in terms of using the formations they're using and keeping Baker Mayfield under center. Because, come on, 3-step drops, you can still get rid of the ball in 2.5 or less off those quick drops, especially when the defense is focused on playing the run, and the linebackers have to come up there with an urgency, especially more with the way the blockers are lined up now.
Sometimes, Matt, I'm going to turn this into On the Couch featuring me and my neuroses. And this is where Adam Harstad would come in and say, it is 4 weeks in, because up to 4 weeks in, our ADP is as predictive or maybe more predictive as the results. But once we get to 4 weeks in, now we have fresh new data. We're not 4 weeks in yet on Dante Pettis, though. We're only 3 weeks in. And as of week 3, there, it was starting to point up. He did get the game-winning touchdown against the Steelers. I know you were a Dante Pettis champion to an extent.
Big extent.
There's a lull right now. There's a lull in his stock. He may have been dropped in some leagues. Certainly he's available for a song. Certainly in dynasty leagues, I said in Buy Low Sell High this week, Matt, if you have coveted Dante Pettis, this may be your last chance, because they're facing Cleveland, and we'll see Greedy Williams, Denzel Ward will be ready. There's banged up secondary there. And I like to believe that during bye weeks, teams reset priorities, try to put emphasis on certain players. It would sure make a lot of sense to get Dante Pettis confident in this game. Are you doubling down on Pettis? You've got some pause. What do we expect to see from him Monday night and going forward?
I am doubling down, so much so that in our staff league, I've had Deebo Samuel and Pettis, and I dropped Deebo Samuel this week. And the reason being is that it was revealed that not only did he have a groin injury, but he had a torn pectoral muscle during the preseason, and they hid that all preseason with him. So I think that there are some compelling reasons to say that he wasn't himself, and if there are reasons why he wasn't himself, there were good ones. in regards to that. And when you look at Deebo Samuel's production, it comes off of gadget plays. It's not, it's either wide open looks in the middle of the field. It's either jet sweeps or screens, and they're not, big boy routes, big boy off of press coverage type of plays. And so, to me, I think that they need another receiver who's competent in running the full route spectrum and being able to make those do the little details like he did against the Steelers to come up with that game winner where he broke back inside and came back to the ball. And I'm just a believer that, that when you have a guy as talented as he's shown, and, he was my number one receiver in the class last year, I think that that's still going to he's still going to emerge. And now that what we're hearing is it's been health related, I'm going ahead. I'm going to go ahead and double down on him and count on him. And you can pick him up as a reserve and monitor it. And that's the way that I look at it. For me, with the team that I had where I dropped Deebo Samuel, I had enough wide receivers that it really doesn't matter. I mean, my problem in that team, in that league, is probably quarterback and running back. But that's a different story.
Yeah, I think that this is a time to get in on Pettis, and I think everyone's going to get a chance to see him and see why Matt Waldman was so excited. I was talking to one of my friends today, and he said, Matt Waldman's been right a lot in the last year or two. I'm like, no, you can just stop. Matt Waldman's been right a lot. And of course, remember, folks, Matt Waldman, RSP.com. Lots of great stuff going on over there. And maybe this is a little more of a Matt Waldman RSP topic, but we're in the last 10 minutes as we're watching the march to the fourth quarter here. Seattle's moving the ball. I mentioned Stephon Diggs in passing when the doctor was in. He also got this Jalen Ramsey situation. What do you think, Matt, about this idea of players? And I always refer to you when I refer to the NFL is a workplace like so many other workplaces. And if someone's not happy in one workplace, they should be able to seek work somewhere else. Now, some of this is interpretation. If the workplace is the NFL, well, then you have to, and the conditions are you play under this contract for this team. That's the workplace. But also, I know, Matt, I brought up the college, players using endorsement money in college, getting it for their likeness and name, that the players provide a lot of the value to this enterprise. So they should have some say. They aren't just interchangeable parts in a machine. But Stephon Diggs, Jalen Ramsey, these are both players, and we've seen it. Antonio Brown took it to a ridiculous extreme, but it's becoming more commonplace. What do you think about the NFL now no longer being immune from players saying, I'm going to be in control of my destiny?
Well, John Elway did it years ago, so we can blame him to start.
Right, and the Mannings.
Yes, and I'm going to blame John Elway because I think that he needs reason to be blamed for something.
Yeah.
So, among other things, probably in Denver's coming soon
yes,
to a theater near you.
There will be blood.
Yes, exactly. But to be honest, I'm kind of agnostic about all of this because, in college I get angrier about how I think that players get exploited a bit, or how they may not get the opportunities that they deserve, and how this system is a little bit, for many years, has been kind of holier than thou about how they're providing kids an education, but they steer kids away from actually valuable degrees, or won't let them do homework, or all sorts of different things that happen at bigger schools and even mid-sized schools at times. But in the NFL, listen, it's cutthroat. It's always been cutthroat. It's always been about negotiating and trying to get the best of what you can. And some players are smarter and savvier than others in terms of how they're going to go about doing that. Some players have the old school mentality of, this is my team and I'm always going to try. I always want to play for it. And this is what I was taught. And owners will then take advantage of that and try to take advantage in that way. So, I mean, in a perfect world, I would like to see us in a situation where the players get what they earn, and that they make enough money that they're happy that we can have guys drafted and they play out their whole careers with one team. I would love that, but I'd also love Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory to be a real thing too. So, and that Gene Wilder and I could be like best friends or something, in Wonka Town. But the thing is that It's just not that way. And you have to understand that if Jalen Ramsey is smart enough to figure out a way to whine or tantrum his way out of town, and other teams are still going to value him and let him do what he needs to do, then okay, that's how it works. If it's, and sometimes, we don't know what goes on in the background enough. And I understand that depending on where you work and where you come from, if you come from a blue collar job with a high union kind of type of deal, where unions are prominent, you're probably kind of like, this is crap. I hate this. I don't like how players are doing. You need to be loyal to what you did. And I get that to an extent. Or maybe you might be, well, listen, sometimes we have to renegotiate. That means we might have to have a strike. We might have to, play in a way that might be a little dirty to some people, and we're going to get portrayed in a way that's not good. If you're in corporate America, certainly all this stuff goes down too. Lots of politics, lots of dysfunctional behavior, and sometimes it works. It happens in our industry with writers. I mean, you have writers who will sit there and bully and whine and say the stupidest things and act like literal babies and like find their and there are certain companies that would just like to see them behave badly and act like little jerks, and then you have some where, and sometimes you go, well, you know what, if you want to be that kind of personality and you're going to get the attention and you're going to get paid for that, then that's your deal. And I think that's kind of what happens with these characters, if we call them characters now in the NFL, in terms of how they go about doing things. And some guys are quiet about it. Others are going to make a lot of noise. And I bet a lot of it also is agent directed in terms of asking for advice on how to do it. And sometimes the agents will steer them right or wrong based on, their past success or failures.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring up agents. I think the other variable here is just how good are you? Cecil brought that up. With Jalen Ramsey, he's probably in the end going to some extent dictate his future. Stephon Diggs maybe isn't above that line. But I forget who it was who put it out there, who put it so well and so succinctly. Like, people think whenever a team breaks a contract, it's routine. But when a player wants to break their contract, it's something unconscionable. So there's not necessarily symmetry there in how we look at this when players want to change things. We're winding down here. Seattle settles for a field goal. I guess I feel like I don't want to use up all the ammo because we're going to get together again on Sunday morning, and there'll be more urgent things going on. Gene will be with us. We'll get a lot of information about the injuries. We'll have Friday reports. Go ahead. What are you reacting to?
There was a golf hit Brandon Cooks pinpoint pass, very tight, but Cooks went down hard after a really tightly contested throw that looked like he almost came down with, and he's hurt now too. He landed on his head, and then his head was kind of turned in an awkward position by the defender's momentum. Shaq Griffin as he was falling to the ground. So it was kind of both a pretty play and an ugly play at the same time here. So, and he's on his back, and they're trying to immobilize him at this point, but it looks like he's moving his hands, so that's a good sign.
One last thing, since we got just 1 minute under the gun here, because I know Matt Waldman, RSP. Let me mention again: fantasy draft, rake free daily fantasy. Go there, promo code football guys, and you'll receive a free 7-day trial on your first $1,000 in rake free entries. All the money goes to the players. One last thing, speaking of, not all the money going to the players, maybe a little bit now. I know that you've got all of this attention on the pro game. I think of Paul and Matt. I think of Saturday to Sunday. You're watching some Saturdays too. If people are going to be watching football this Saturday, I don't know up on who's on by. Give folks one name, give them a player to track, just to get a little taste of what we're going to see coming soon on Sunday.
Yeah, I think Joe Burrow, the quarterback out of LSU.
Yeah, they finally have a quarterback down here.
They do. Former Ohio State player. I really like what I see out of Joe Burrow. He can manipulate defenses pretty well. And he's one of those guys that when he makes a mistake, he comes back and is able to still be as daring and confident as he needs to be in situations where he might have had pause due to the mistake he made prior. But he moves well in the pocket. He has good poise. He throws the ball accurately. and he has enough of an NFL arm that I think we are going to see him on Sunday. He's a pretty compelling quarterback.
Here come the quarterbacks, and there's teams that need them. And thankfully, we're here to help quarterback your fantasy lineups, strategy, and mostly just your enjoyment and experience of this, because you do that for us, folks. You give us the opportunity to enjoy each other in the chat room, as always. It's great seeing all the regular show up and all the interactions, and really just the interactions in the chat room, as it has always been, Matt, reflecting our vibes and again, people reaching out to us saying, hey, it seems like y'all genuinely enjoy each other. And part of me wants to say, well, in this fantasy football podcast world, why does that sound rare? Like, I would just think that would be the default. Right. But I'm glad that we can provide that. And definitely, folks, always try to seek things out where you're genuinely enjoying other human beings. It's one of the best feelings in life, and getting to do this for you is one of our best feelings. So it's likely thrilling fourth quarter. And as always, stay frosty. No. Smoky. No. Stay classy.
I've got a way we could slip something past Gene.